Peace and all good from Franciscan Media. I'm Father Jim Sabak, and this is the Inbreaking of the Word. 17th Sunday in Ordinary Time. We have met the halfway mark in our number of Ordinary Time Sundays. So it's not necessarily the middle of our Ordinary Time Sundays, nor is it the middle of the year anymore. That passed us. But there are 34 Sundays in Ordinary Time. So if you add those to the Sundays of Easter, Lent, Christmas, Advent, that's where you get your whole full year from. So 34, it's 17 this week, so we've hit the halfway mark. So we are kind of in the downward stretch. Well, actually, we will hit that final kind of stretch in the church year when we get to the Feast of the Holy Cross, because that begins to change even the dynamic, of what we're celebrating and how we're celebrating it as we move to the conclusion of the church's year. But we'll get to that when we come to Holy Cross Sunday, which we do celebrate on a Sunday this year. So anyway, 17th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Two interesting readings, Genesis and Luke today. They both speak about not being afraid to ask from God what it is that we need in our lives. There are two interesting kinds of narratives that sort of demonstrate that, and they demonstrate that in one way as a great exaggeration into what is being requested, and asking God to do something about it. So Genesis, it's the wonderful story of Abraham basically wheeling and dealing with God to save Sodom and Gomorrah from destruction. And so again, this is where Sodom and Gomorrah are on the brink of destruction, and Abraham says, why are you going to do this? Because basically people are going to say that you're just like every other god and goddess. You don't have any mercy, you don't have any kindness, you don't have any love. So what if there are good people in Sodom and Gomorrah? What if there are 50 good people in Sodom and Gomorrah? Abraham just reaches out for a number, and God says, "Well, if there are 50 good people, I guess I won't destroy it." And then Abraham begins to push the envelope. What if there are 40? What if there are 30? What if there are 20? What if there are only 10 good people in Sodom and Gomorrah? Will you destroy it because of that? Not acknowledging the fact that there are good people in the midst of these cities and towns that your anger and rage is blazed up against. And God says, "No, I won't destroy it if there are 10 good people." Well, Again, this is where Abraham doesn't go to 5. He doesn't even go to 1. And he doesn't say, well, look, maybe something can be done with Sodom and Gomorrah. Maybe you don't have to destroy them at all. But it is, just 10 good people. If they are there, God would not destroy it. And obviously, perhaps there weren't 10 good people, and that's why Sodom and Gomorrah get destroyed, which is, again, it's a very interesting kind of allusion to connect to what the gospel is going to talk about. But it is the sense in which Abraham had no problem talking to God as he would a friend, as he would someone who was a companion on the journey, and basically, saying to God, you have to remember, who you are, and what you have told me that you are, and not work against that. So this reminding God, of God's own self, is part of this asking that Abraham gets involved with. And that's kind of what we see in Luke's gospel, again, where Jesus is talking about asking and you'll receive. Don't be afraid to ask of God anything. And the reason why people are afraid to ask, is because unfortunately the scribes and Pharisees are telling them otherwise. You don't dare ask God for anything. God does what God does, because God is God. And if you are poor, that's because you deserve to be poor. And if you are rich, it's because you deserve to be rich. And Jesus is kind of showing that's not the way it is at all. And to think of God in that way as a capricious God who's basically a trickster and a jokester, and who basically, doesn't move with any kind of, semblance or rationale or whatever it is, but is picky and choosy, again, is not a God to be involved with. It's not a God, to have in our own lives. That is not who we are called to be in relationship with. And then this great parable, which is, again, much more simplistic than Abraham's asking God to avoid destruction of 2 cities, but the thing is, this example of this neighbor who has guests and who needs some bread to feed them, and he doesn't have enough, so he goes to a neighbor's house late at night and says, will you help me? And although the neighbor says no at first, the persistence is what gets this man, the sustenance that he needs to feed his guests. Persistence. Again, it's like this is where God wants to help. And sometimes, again, God needs to be perhaps remembered that God is a God of help, a God of assistance, a God of the journey, a God of companionship. And because of that, God basically will offer us what it is that we need. But the thing is, we have to know to ask. We have to not be afraid to ask. Because just thinking that God is going to give it all to us when we need it or take it all away from us when we don't need it is not really good, because that's not the idea of relationships. That's not how we work with each other. We don't just sit back passively and wait for something good or something bad to happen. We get involved with things, people of activity, like Martha was, again, last week. Again, a person who gets things done. This is the God who wants us to know that, and who wants us to get things done by not being afraid to ask God for what it is that we need. Colossians, in between, these two readings, basically, again, but the thing is to remember that basically all of our brokenness is nailed to the cross. Everything that might get in the way, of us feeling that we are good, that we are worthy, that we are loved, that we are capable, has all been taken away from us, even if we didn't deserve it. Because this is how gracious and wonderful God is to kind of make everything new, because that is God's purpose, not to let us mire and wallow in our sadness and our brokenness all the time, because it's very easy to do that, but a God who dares to make things new. And out of that newness, to be able to see a future that is bright and glorious. Continue peace and good from Franciscan Media. May the Lord always show you his love.